Peace, all peace. So I'm sure that almost all, if not all of you by now have heard of the phenomenon known as climate change. And recently I came across an article by the World Health Organization that dubbed it as the greatest threat to humanity in the 21st century. And I wanted to chime in and break things down from my perspective. So climate change, to be 100% honest with you, is a major distraction. Essentially, way too much attention and importance is placed on something that is natural. In life, we know that time and change are two factors that are forever constant. You cannot change or reverse it. You can try as hard as you can, but it will never be truly as it once was before the change. It's like dropping a glass cup. Of course, you could try and tape it back together as best you can, but the water will always seep through. Or like ripping a shirt and trying to sew it back together. You could sew it as if it was brand new, but of course, that change already occurred and you cannot revert back to how it was before the change. Logically, the only way to really change would be to undo time, which essentially would be time travel to before the change happened, and obviously that's not possible. In a nutshell, climate change is natural. And you also have to keep in mind the fact that the Earth is ridiculously tremendous in size. It's a massive place. So different regions will have different climates. Also taking into account hemispheres, taking into account the 4 seasons. So of course some spots are going to be warmer and some spots are going to be cooler. That's just the way it is. Now, of course, it's been slightly amplified, especially when you consider the huge rise in human population these past few decades, as well as the rise in and the use of various technologies. But nonetheless, the perceived risks or dangers climate change poses has been largely exaggerated by the mainstream media and the powers that be. The powers that be are clearly using climate change as a boogeyman to divert the attention of the general public away from more important issues. I mean, let's look at things rationally and use a bit of logic here. According to climate.gov, which allegedly is a reliable source, the Earth's temperature has risen by 0.14 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.08 degrees Celsius per decade since 1880. And since 1981, as we mentioned before, that's gone up with the rise in human population, as well as the rise in not only the use of technologies, but the availability of new technologies around the world, to a frightening figure of 0.32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade since 1981. Is that really a cause for concern? When you extrapolate that, that's anywhere from a 1 to 3 degree difference per 100 years. Most people don't even get to live to be 100 years old. Like I've just mentioned, the change is extremely small, especially considering it's measured over a decade. And again, that the Earth is very large, has 2 hemispheres, has 4 seasons, and many different regions that have and experience many different climates. So when you factor in the very small change in temperature, how long of a time that takes to develop, and the humongous space and distance across which this all has to take place, overall, like I mentioned, the mainstream media inflates and exaggerates the perceived dangers, threats, and risks that climate change poses. Not to go off on a tangent here, but an extreme bit of irony I like to jokingly but seriously point to when comparing and talking about climate change in discussions with friends and people in general in real life is the sudden prevalence of air fryers. Now you might think, what? Air fryers, climate change? How do those things relate? Well, let me explain. Since the start of the decade 2019-2020, there has been a huge rise in popularity amongst the air fryer. Typically, one would fry food with hot oil or a stove top of some sort or a microwave. Now I get it, even those may not be the healthiest options available to us as people, but at least we have that continuity, at least we have that familiarity with those products and with those methods. Air fryers, on the other hand, are new, and its potential risks and dangers are largely uncharted territory, and yet nobody bats an eye. And its popularity has and continues to rise dramatically. It's rather trendy. It's in right now. But if you really think about it, in the literal sense, at its bare bones, it's severe climate change in a machine. You're cooking or frying food with air. That doesn't even sound healthy. With a little bit of deep diving, a little bit of research, you can find that air frying can create harmful compounds, such as acrylamides, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and heterocyclic amines, which all are a result of high heat cooking, especially with meat. And since air frying is relatively new, as mentioned before, scientists still need to do additional research to clarify how air frying and these compounds correlate, but it is known that these compounds have associations with cancer risk. Room temperature is approximately 20 to 22 degrees Celsius or 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And for most foods, your air fryer will cook at 375 to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Really think about that temperature increase. And this happens within 5 to 30 minutes, as opposed to that 0.1 or 0.3 degree increase that happens over a decade. And that huge temperature increase in a small amount of time happens in a tiny machine, which then goes into your tiny body. Whereas the small temperature increase that happens over a long amount of time happens over a huge planet. And yet, I have yet to see any activism, any protests regarding air fryers, but we have such a problem thinking that climate change is going to end humanity. Put that into perspective. With the outcry and activism applied to climate change, air fryers should have never been created in the first place and should be banned from widespread use. Obviously, I'm being a bit facetious here, but it's all to point to the fact that climate change is normal, it's rather natural, and its potential implications, as if it's the end of the world or the greatest threat to humanity in the 21st century, have been heavily overblown and exaggerated. All that activism, all that alleged research, and all that attention and energy could be directed towards more important issues that we face in the world at large. So I'm being for real, guys. I can't stress this enough. Really start to conduct a little bit of independent research and don't believe the narrative the mainstream media pushes just because they're the mainstream media. Stay safe. See you soon. Bless.